two excellent speakers who will set us off with a presentation. They are Alexandre de Streel, a full professor of European law at the University of Namur, and Pierre Larouche, a full professor of law and innovation at the University of Montreal. So please, you can take it away with the presentation up to a maximum of 20 minutes, and then we'll start the discussion after.
Thank you, Friso. So I will begin our presentation. We will switch in the middle, so to limit the inconvenience. I come as a relative newcomer to the issue of ecosystems. I've been working with Alexandre on disruptive innovation. I've been working a lot on standardization, AI regulation now. So I'm tackling this. I hope not to insult anyone who has already written on this, but this is what we would like to put to you to trigger and start the discussion. So as a starting point, I always like to look at the actual literature on this. There's a bit of economics, but a lot of business strategy. What are the characteristics that we see in that literature for ecosystems? So what is it that we're talking about? Essentially, it's a phenomenon that brings three characteristics. Ecosystems have modularity. So you have niches, as we like to call them, and that modularity, of course, makes it possible or improves the ability to coordinate and to have some interoperability between services. But that's not enough. Ecosystems will arise in a situation where you have complementarities between the members of the ecosystem, and these complementarities are non-generic. So it's either something unique that both sides bring to the table, or what is called a supermodular complementarity, or better known as a network effect. And third element, there's some interdependency. So the members of the ecosystem, and that links us with the origins of the term in biology, are interdependent. They depend on one another. They cannot move unilaterally. And typically, what you see in the ecosystem is one member will take the lead of, and will be the hub, but there's no clear hierarchy. It's an interdependent entity, so there are dealings and back and forth. So the hub will lead the ecosystem, and that brings us to add the idea of governance. So there's some governance issue that the hub deals with, and we'll say, well, look, this is the ecosystem we have. These are the niches, these are the opportunities that you have to take part in the ecosystem. This is how it will work. And when the hub does that, it constrains the strategies of the other participant. That's the main effect. As was said a few minutes ago in the keynote, the world of business strategies is very complicated. It's hard to model it. So that's what the hub offers to the other counterparts. Instead of having this uncertainty and this wide range of business strategies, here is a strategy, become a part of the ecosystem, join, be in one niche or the other, and you have a strategy that offers a bit more, it's better known, and it has probably less uncertainty. So it allows the participants to reduce strategic uncertainty and to move into, to go back to the business and the organization literature, move into a routine environment where they know what they're doing and they're just seek to maximize their profits in that context. There are, of course, also benefit for consumers. Consumers get the opportunity to benefit from the ecosystem, to have products that work easily with one another and that are coordinated. So there are some related concepts. I'm not going to go into them in detail, just to say that it should be clear that ecosystems are not the same as platforms or aftermarkets or issues of vertical integration. They offer specific characteristics. Now, one thing that struck us is that the ecosystems are populated by a range of actors that have diverse strategies. It's actually, if you take the theory on its face, it's very fluid. So the hub or the orchestrator will typically be a firm that is quite nimble and has a relatively lucid business strategy. After all, they put it together, so they interact with the environment, and they have a range of strategies themselves. And we put this picture of Jobs just as a reminder that at the time he was fighting against his board who wanted to have a more open strategy for Apple. He insisted on keeping a proprietary strategy. So it's not a done deal that the hub will follow a proprietary strategy or an open strategy. These are considerations that hubs take into account, and they change as we go along. The other firms, they can be, so they have these strategic choices. Of course, they can be complementers, so they occupy a niche in the ecosystem, and then there will be an interdependency relation with the hub and with the others. But they can also be competitors, either head-on, which seems less likely nowadays, or sideways with some kind of disruptive innovation. And other firms will move between these roles. It also depends on their strategic assessment. And we also think that we should improve, or we should be a bit more sophisticated in the analysis of consumers as well. So within consumers, it's not one block. Typically, you would have a mix of what we could call the keeners, the technically savvy consumers, who have sharp preferences, not identical from one to the other, but they look for the best. So they will say, yeah, it's a nice ecosystem, but maybe we can play with it or we can improve on it. And then you have the mainstreamers, the consumers who say, no, I really value the ecosystem. It's way more convenient. I don't have strong preferences on any of the components. I'm going to go with the ecosystem. And there's no time to detail this, but we would think that there's a way to build a model where, as long as the two categories can talk and you can move between the categories, the ecosystem delivers welfare to everyone. So we have a multiplicity of actors and strategies, and these are powerful competitive forces. Now, it struck us also that a bit like the discussion of competition for the market at the time, ecosystem-related arguments are brought into discussion often in situations where they don't really apply because the ecosystem is not really the best way to describe what is going on. So we have pathologies of ecosystems. So what can go wrong, or how can the ecosystem stop functioning properly? And our intuition is it involves typically these two characteristics of modularity and interdependence where we have breakdowns. So the hub will exploit its position, for instance, to move away from an interdependence relationship and to be more in a dependence setting and extract rent from the other players. So this is the Epic Games type of situation. It's covered by the DMA as well. So take a big cut of what happens, and without the other side having any say or being able to say, well, look, we would like to talk about this. Or the hub starts to decide unilaterally on issues of modularity. So no new modules would be created, or the hub says, well, this niche here, we will just take it over. This can be for a good reason, because it's not working well, there's bad quality and so on, but it could also be just because, we feel like extending into this area. And of course, the type of problems that we deal with merger controls, so external acquisitions of complementers, also to occupy their niche. So we would say, yeah, there's the ecosystem, the characteristics, it can work, but we have cases where we have pathologies. So in keeping with the theme of the conference, try to operationalize things, how should we go about trying to find or identify or single out these pathological cases? These are the factors we think could be useful in competitive analysis. Granted, it's still very general, it's not very operational yet, but it's one path in the direction. It struck us that, again, we could use the old setting from political science, voice, exit, loyalty, as a kind of guide in our analysis. So the voice element is the idea that behind ecosystems there are governance issues. It's fundamentally a governance endeavor. So we should look at how it works inside, at the idea that firms should have a voice in this. So competitive analysis should not be just about looking at whether there's an exit option or not. So that would involve looking at what is going on within the ecosystem. Do we have a reduction of interdependency? Are the firms that populate the ecosystems and the consumers able to react if the hub makes an adverse decision? Are there dealings to correct this? or do we see exit? When there's a modularity issue, do we see arbitrary decisions by the hub? Do we see a lack of negotiations over reasonable requests by complementers? And here, one of the things that struck me personally also is all the work that I've done on standardization it's not very far from the discussion of ecosystems. And you could look at the rapidly mounting friend case law as a guide that we can look under competition law at how negotiations are taking place within the ecosystem. Are the firms in good faith or not? And if they're in good faith, yes, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work, but at least the mechanism is in place and it seems to be working. Outside the ecosystem, what could be factors to look at? Of course, competition between the ecosystems. And the trick is, are we in a situation where the hub uses its position to put the third parties in such a situation that their strategic options are reduced? It's either be in the ecosystem under the conditions that we dictate, or you're on your own to compete against the entire ecosystem, which some will say, well, gives them massive incentive because the payoff will be massive, but at the same time, it's not necessarily the best strategic option. It's very high risk. So do we have a situation where the exit option has become almost illusory? And as a subsidiary factor, are there external shocks that upset ecosystems or not in that industry? Because again, on the assumption that the ecosystem is an attempt at stabilizing and getting some clarity in the strategic horizon, external shocks do the opposite. And if there are external shocks at regular intervals, then it shakes up the system and it opens the possibility for other ecosystems to arise or for ecosystems to evolve. So I will stop here and hand over to my co-author.
Okay, so good morning, everyone, and thanks very much for the invitation, Nicolas and the team. So basically, we think that if we have that kind of pathology, so in a sense the modularity is reduced or the interdependency is moving to a dependency relationship, then maybe an intervention would be needed. Now, I mean, I think, and I was struck how, you know, there is this concept of ecosystem now and how many politicians, agencies and so on seems to be concerned by a closed ecosystem, and in a way, and that's why we put the Matrix movie, that's maybe the worst nightmare of every agency, you know, is that we end up to be in an ecosystem which is unique and which we don't even know that we are in the ecosystem, you know. So I think, you know, that's partly part of what is in the back of the mind of many people when we talk about ecosystem. But so the question is what to do. And the first thing we want to say, and it seems to be obvious, but it's important to recall, there is no easy solution and there is no first best solution. So we were talking about trade-off before, and I think here more than ever we have a lot of trade-off in the intervention. That doesn't mean that we should not intervene, but it means that we should take those trade-offs into account. The first thing is that we think that maximizing modularity or openness is not necessarily optimal. And this is maybe one of the critiques that I have behind the Digital Market Act. I mean, you know, I like more or less this act, contrary to several people, but I think one thing which is sometimes a little bit missing is that we don't have a theory of the right optimal point of openness in an ecosystem behind the DMA. You know, and there is a kind of assumption that openness is always good, you know, wherever it is, or if you want to increase modularity is always a good thing, and that's maybe not the case, okay? The second thing is that, of course, public intervention will have some effect on the governance of the ecosystem. And another thing which probably we should alleviate is that we have a kind of homogeneous effect. You know, Pierre was mentioning that one of the important things is that there is diverse strategies in the ecosystem, and this is why I really recommend to watch or rewatch the movie Jobs, because really that's very clear how it had to fight its own borders, Pierre was saying, to have a closed ecosystem. And we have Android, which is more open. I think it would be not a good result of the public intervention if at the end of the day, we end up with the two mobile ecosystem being exactly the same, That doesn't mean that Apple should not be more open, let's be clear. But I think we have to be careful of homogeneous effect, because that's where also a part of the competition. And another thing which is important to remark is that the question at the end of the day is whether this governance system should be determined by the ecosystem, by the hub, or by the public authority. And what we think would be important in public intervention is that if the interdependence has become a dependency relationship, an intervention is important to reintroduce this interdependence within the ecosystem, but it should not be up to a point that it becomes a completely independence, and we have a kind of a classical vertical setting, Interdependence is key and should be kept in the ecosystem. So basically what we think, and that is very crude, but in terms of possible regulatory or antitrust intervention, is first along the line of modularity, and second along the line of interdependence, And if I take, for instance, the example of the Apple App Store, which is in the mind of many people, given the FTC action in the complaint in the US and the DMA implementation in the EU, if you want to increase modularity in the Apple ecosystem, that would mean to push for alternative app store, And next to the Apple App Store on the iOS, you would have to have several one. And as you know, this is one of the goals of the DMA, this is one of the goals of the FTC complaint and different action in California launched by Epic. The second one is if you want to work on increasing interdependence, that would be more regulating the condition of access to the App Store. So not to have a kind of a form of structural intervention within the ecosystem by increasing the modularity, but having a kind of conduct requirement on the access to App Store. And as you may know, in the DMA provide that there is the condition to the access to App Store should be under front condition. Okay, so that's what you may want to do, and probably you may need to intervene on both. But it's clear that increasing modularity may help to reintroduce some more interdependence or decreasing dependency. The second thing is how you do it, and here we think that because ecosystem is mostly about governance, a form of indirect intervention which is around working on a governance framework or imposing a governance framework is probably better than a direct intervention where you impose specific conduct. And in that regard, if we continue to take Apple as an example, it's interesting to see that the European Commission now is about to specify a number of obligations which are interoperability obligations which are in the DMA, and we note, and I think that's probably a good approach, that what the Commission wants to do is to regulate the governance framework for interoperability, but not go necessarily further. But I guess Inc can correct me or complement. But I think it's interesting that, in a way, to increase, I think the goal of the Commission is mostly to increase modularity and through indirect intervention. And that's probably the good way to go. So basically, and to summarize the takeaway, three characteristics for an ecosystem: modularity, complementarity, and interdependence. Three characteristics which are key because if they are changing, that may show some pathology. And a governance framework, which is key because that's how, if there is a pathology, that's where probably you have to intervene. We should never forget that there are many actors. We should not only concentrate on the ecosystem and the complementer of that ecosystem, but look at the whole picture, as it was also mentioned in the first talk, the holistic approach. So pathology, if you realize that some of those characteristics are reduced, in particular the modularity or the interdependence, and antitrust remedy or regulatory remedy in Europe, because we have the DMA, not easy and no first best, probably better to focus on governance than directly regulated conduct, and clearly an intervention on modularity is more structural than an intervention on specifically dependent. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much, Alex and Pierre, for this great foundation that you've laid for us on this panel. And as promised, we'll get back to you at the end for some more takeaways.